let me, okay, got it.
Oops, I forgot that part.
All good. Let me ask you a series of sort of questions to think about, and you can say out loud or not, or put your hand up, or so. Do you care about public libraries and our local communities staying open and having books on their shelves? Okay. Do you care about public schools being funded so that they can operate 5 days a week, offer our children all the arts and music and robust learning that they need across our country? Do you care about our public schools teaching accurate science, accurate history, and accurate and age appropriate sex education? Okay. Do you care about being able to oppose climate deniers and shunners and protecting our environment? Do you care about protecting religious minorities, non-believers, and also racial minorities? Do you care about enabling women and people with uteruses to make decisions about their own bodies according to their own religious beliefs and moral values? Then you care about church-state separation an enormous amount. And for every one of those questions that I just posed to you, there are efforts afoot that are massively undermining those protections right now. There are public libraries that are being defunded because they have books on their shelves that religious extremists disagree with, that are being censored. There are public schools where all across the country where money is being diverted from them to private religious schools, and the leaders of the religious extremist movements have copped to, I have quotes in my notes here, that they're trying to defund public schools in order to do that. And in fact, that movement got took off really in the face of Brown versus Board of Education. How many of you know that the private school voucher movement was really a reaction to the 1954 ruling of Brown versus Board of Education and an effort to create white Christian segregated academies for white kids to be able to flee to so they didn't have to attend segregated public schools. It's documented in books. LGBTQ equality is under enormous attack right now by religious extremists, in particular because of recent gains, and so that's something else. So all of these areas, that I just laid out for you, our case at Americans United on behalf of the Bremerton School District in Washington State and the praying football coach, and stopping him from being able to pressure students in a public school when he was on official duty, when he only had access to the 50-yard line at that time directly following games, because he was an agent of the state, public school coach, from being able to stop him from pressuring students to pray. But the court found against us on, frankly, alternative facts, saying he was just praying in a solitary and private manner. By the way, the court this term in the Carson v. Macon case said that the state of Maine isn't allowed to stop taxpayer money from funding religious education and discrimination. And the court said that the city of Boston isn't allowed to stop a explicit Christian nationalist group from being able to display their Christian flag on one of the city hall flagpoles. So that, like, when I walk by as a Jew, I'm like, what is going on with my city? And maybe, most accessibly for most people, the Supreme Court, through Justice Alito's opinion, imposed one narrow religious doctrine about when life begins on all of us and ruled against abortion rights, having in the first sentence and the last sentence of his opinion this thinly veiled religious perspective that he called a moral issue. Right. So all these things right now are blowing up and are under attack because church-state separation is being undermined with a venom of and fear of people who don't want to lose their privilege and power in our society. We could talk about why that is, and the changing demographics, and the first Black president, and the Me Too movement, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and so much more, right? We could talk about it all. But that's what's going on. That's how broad it is, right? The attack is the Root and Ram case, our Amy Madonna case on behalf of a Catholic woman who was turned away from a taxpayer-funded agency in South Carolina from offering her home up to kids in need because she's Catholic and not evangelical Protestant. Can you believe her name is Amy Madonna? And our case gets to be called Madonna versus HHS. That was unbelievable. That was like pure coincidence. So it's all those things. Okay, so what is church-state separation about? Why did our framers put it there? Because they were worried about religion and they were worried about government. They were worried about freedom of conscience, right? Thomas Jefferson wrote the underlying Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. That's thought to be the framework for the religion language in the First Amendment. And he was worried about, and it's his quote, and just think about how radical this is for the late 1790s. The Gentile and the Jew, he called it the Mohammedan and the Hindu and the infidel of every faith. Those were his words of who we were trying to protect with our religious freedom protections in this country, right? These folks, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison wrote the First Amendment language. And by the way, they got a lot of things wrong. They got a lot of things wrong in our Constitution. Who they counted as people, who got the right to vote, who they had in their view of equality was way limited. But they got it right, that they were vesting the power in we the people and not in a divinity for the first time. It was radical. But our Constitution doesn't talk about God anywhere. It only talks about religion and ensuring that there's not a religious test that keeps people out of public office, and in protecting the free exercise of religion and the idea that the government wouldn't establish a religion. The free exercise clause and we call it the non-establishment clause. They work together to protect everybody's religious freedom. If it were just the free exercise clause, then what Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to write about, what she wrote in her dissent in the Hobby Lobby case, that your right to swing your fist ends at the tip of the other guy's nose, right? If it were just the free exercise clause, then unbridled free exercise means that the majority gets to impose their views on the rest of us, and that the rest of us have to absorb the cost. If they cause us harm, if they swing their fist into our nose, then we're bearing the cost of their religion, and we don't have our own religious freedom. That's why the framers had the free exercise clause and said that the government couldn't establish religion. What does government not establishing religion mean? That the government couldn't favor one religion over any other, or religion over non-religion. Again, radical for its day, right? But that meant that we could all have freedom of conscience in this country. How we put it at Americans United is we all are free to live as ourselves, free from someone else's religious dictates, and to believe as we choose, right? That's what our Constitution protects. We like to say that religious freedom is a shield. People like that. We tested it. It protects us, right? That resonates. It protects all of us, no matter what we believe, or even if we're non-religious, which an increasing percentage of younger people are, which explains some of the backlash, right? It protects all of us, no matter what we believe, but it shouldn't be used as a sword, a shield, and not a sword. It's not a license to discriminate and harm others. And that's what the shadowy network that we're up against, this well-funded shadowy network, are trying to co-opt and turn religious freedom into. A license to discriminate, right? Whereas Whereas church-state separation is what protects and equalizes. It levels the playing field. No matter if we're part of a majority or a minority, what turning religious freedom into a sword is meant to do is to give those with power more advantage in our society and to place them above those of us who have less power. What they don't realize is that church-state separation actually protects them too, and that America wouldn't be America without it. We would fall apart. That our democracy rests on this pillar. That if you look at January 6th and who was there, it's a visual representation of the way that religious extremists won't stop short of toppling our democracy, that they need to topple our democracy in order to cement their power and privilege. You didn't miss the Jesus flags, the crosses that were parading. And by the way, that offends so many of my Christian neighbors and friends, and the Camp Auschwitz t-shirts that were on display, because ultimately religious privilege cannot coexist with our democracy and what it's about. And church-state separation is what protects so many of our freedoms, but also our equality, which is what de Tocqueville observed we in America care about the most. So finally, it's my last part, Wendy, and then I'm going to turn it, open it back. What can we do? There's such a robust discussion that we can have here. And there's so many things that we can do. We have a robust strategy. But one of the key parts of it is, I thought this would be particularly relevant to this audience, activating faith leaders to support church-state separation, making it more of a priority, having faith leaders be featured in connecting the dots between church-state separation and so many of these other issues that people care about. Why? Well, because in America, it's actually church-state separation which has allowed religion to thrive. We're actually more religious than in a lot of religious states, because religion has to compete, and it has to constantly thrive to be its best in order to survive. So we are still a majority religious country. Now, it's true that we're no longer a majority white and Christian since 2014. And I think that explains a lot right there about what's going on. But we are still majority religious. And by the way, as you all know, we're still majority Christian. So we need Christian leaders alongside of other religious leaders to be key voices in our fight to protect this bedrock of democracy. Also, one of our opponents' favorite things to do is to call us anti-religious, to call us anti-Christian. But don't forget, our whole cause was founded by a bunch of Methodist pastors in Chicago, and I'll let you in on a little secret. Who knows that Americans United for separation of church and state was called something else originally? Anyone know that? Looking for hands. I'll look on screen too. Hold on. Okay, I don't see any hands. Here's my secret. Do you know what this group that this Jewish woman now is running was originally called? Protestants and Other Americans for Separation of Church and State. We have been backed by Christians. We still are. The guy who's about to take over our board as the chair was the two-term president of the National Council of Churches, an ecumenical group, as many of you know, presiding over, I think it's 38 different Christian denominations. We have a feminist Jewish leader joining our board, a Seventh-day Adventist, a Disciples of Christ pastor, a UU pastor, a Baptist pastor joining our board. I mean, we could talk about all the cases we bring with religious leaders and the amicus briefs we file and the letters to state legislators and Congress. So Americans United brings together religious and non-religious folks every day in our battle for freedom without favor and equality without exception. And we need you to join and be a part of our movement in order to win, and that's why I'm so happy to be invited here today and to continue the dialogue. And I'll stop there, Wendy.
Thank you. So a couple things, so many things that you've said really resonate. One is I want to amplify the we need you piece, and the most important place we need all of these voices is to vote, right? So that's the first place, that's the important start. So if you have not done an early ballot, or if there's any way that you have energy to participate in getting out the vote, please. And I say that without regard to whatever your political affiliation is. It's important that our voices are heard. And in that, I want to ask the question to you, Rachel, which is, we're in Nebraska. Nebraska is a Republican dominated state, even though Omaha itself is has been a blue dot sometimes. And one of the kind of framework of the Tri-Faith Initiative that I think is so important is that we continue to value that having a seat at the table is more important than agreeing, right? Because we live next to people who for whom the conversation we're having today lands differently. Where are there opportunities in these very extreme polarized moments for us at our Thanksgiving table, perhaps as a start, to bridge some of these conversations?
To bridge them. Well, I actually think that church-state separation is a uniter. I mean, think about our name. Church-state separation should be as American as apple pie, because it is that seminal to our democracy. And frankly, at Americans United back in the 1980s, we were majority Republican. Now, I mean, the parties have changed. We're nonpartisan, but we should be the center of sort of everything that people care about, because it's about freedom of conscience. It's about making sure that anybody, so long as they're not subjecting others to harm with their religion, gets to be who they are, and be true to themselves. We should be a uniter, and this is a seminal part of democracy. So I think reminding everybody of that, it's a little antiquated, but that Thomas Jefferson quote about the Jew and the Gentile, the Mohammedan, the Hindu, and the infidel of every faith. I mean, that is why it's there, to protect all of us. That's why American Baptists are so profoundly with us, because they remember, they're Christians, but they remember when they were persecuted, in this country. And so they are denominationally some of our staunchest supporters, right? So I think reminding folks that democracy, that America could not exist, it would topple, that this prevents division in our country. When the government favors one religion, we see the wars that erupt, blood is shed. It's hard to get in touch with that today. So I think at our Thanksgiving tables, reminding folks about how this is the uniter, and that we did message testing. Here's another uniter. We did message testing. I was a little bit afraid about this one, you all, because, when you do polling, some people just want to test, like, we want to be able to show everybody and just like put the message that everybody agrees with out there. But we also wanted to understand how people felt about our issue and not just sell it. So we tested something that I called the essence message. So we used to always say, bear with me on this one, religious freedom is the right to believe or not as you see fit, so long as you don't harm others. And everybody agreed with that. Like, people were nodding. But I wondered, like, a lot of what we're fighting for today is so long as you don't harm others. Like, that's where a lot of the battle is taking place on our issue. So I suggested in the 11th hour, when we did public opinion research, let's just test that part. So we're like omitting the flowery part that everybody agrees with. Religious freedom is the right to believe or not. I mean, Mike Pence said that. Like, I used to open my speeches with quotes of him saying that and be like, who said that? And everybody would be like, Thomas Jefferson. And I'd be like, nope, Mike Pence. So like, even he says that, but I was like, let's test just the second part, called it the essence message. And we tested this. Here's what we tested. The law should not allow anyone to use their religious beliefs to harm others. The law should not, the government, the law should not allow anyone. And guess what? 79% of people out there, including everybody, agreed. So that's another really winning argument, Wendy, for the Thanksgiving table.
Thank you. Thank you. So relevant. I want to turn a little bit to the Supreme Court. I know that we're aware of the decisions around that you've mentioned around Roe and Dobbs, as well as prayer in school. But can you speak a little bit about some of the cases that are coming? In particular, there's one that's related to the PA system and who might be able to put public prayer and what those prayers might look like. I think that you had mentioned in an earlier conversation. I don't know if that case has moved forward or not. Just what are some of the cases that will be coming in front of this 6-3 court, and where do you think this might go next, particularly with the decision seeming to foreshadow that there were others in the slippery slope?
Right. Well, okay. Right now, in front of the Supreme Court next term so far, and this is an ongoing thing on our issue, is only one case, which is this 303 creative case. I don't know if folks have heard about it, out of Colorado State again. That's the same place where the Masterpiece Cake Shop case took place. And it's the same type of case. It's about whether a graphic design firm that has actually never even had to say no to a gay couple to like design their wedding stuff, has the right to turn them away. But we know that Justice Thomas, in his concurrence in one of the cases this past term, invited, a reexamination of birth control, a reexamination of sexual intimacy, a reexamination of marriage equality, right? Like, and he obviously is on the fringe. And we used to think that like everything that he was putting out was so fringe that it was terrible, but we didn't have to really take it seriously. But with the constitution of the court being as it is, we do. I mean, the bottom line with PA systems, but right now we don't have that going to the Supreme Court, but we'll see, is, you're not allowed to use, there's a case called Santa Fe. It was Santa Fe, Texas, by the way, not the Santa Fe that I think is so incredible in New Mexico. But anyway, you're not allowed to, the school is not allowed to deploy its PA system to impose prayer or one religious point of view on students, because that's part of that's machinery of the state, and it's obviously students experience what comes from the PA system. It's sort of like, that the voice of God in a play or something, it's like the voice of the school, and so like, you're not allowed to do that. But is prayer allowed in public school? Of course. I mean, everyone's favorite line is like, there's been prayer in public school since the first math test, and anyone's allowed to pray to themselves in public school. You just can't pressure the government, agents of the state can't pressure students to pray. And, we can talk about what that looks like, but certainly when you're a coach who holds precious benefits from playtime to school scholarships, when you initiate prayer in a public way during the time of the team huddle, that's pressuring students to pray. So anyway, that's a little bit more on that.
Thank you. So in our staff, we've been having a conversation about kind of the different iterations of religious freedom, and we have 3 buckets. One is the freedom to be your religious identity, including belief, behavior, and belonging.
Mhm.
Second is freedom from religion.
Mhm.
And the third, which is perhaps the most nuanced, is the freedom to shift religious identity over
100%.
time. And we're curious if you could speak about that freedom and kind of the story of how that connects and disconnects from religion and religious identity.
It's a key part of it. I actually didn't give my spiel on that, but what is religious freedom? It's the right to um, have a belief system of your own, to change that belief system across the course of your lifetime, to concoct your own spiritual brew, right? All these things are permitted in America. It's what makes America such an inclusive country. Um, there are tons of folks these days. I mean, a lot of these younger people, the millennials, who are identifying as non-religious, you may know like 50% of them believe in God. So like they're concocting their own spiritual brew. And that's cool. That's cool here. So um, a lot of it's interesting, when I've spoken at like Unitarian churches or even like United Church of Christ churches, seem to have a lot of folks that have left other Christian or Jewish in the UU scenario, backgrounds and joined a new one and found like an even better spiritual home. I mean, I am doing on the side yoga teacher training. And it's been interesting because like, I'm learning all about Hinduism. And, I had this one like point of crisis in the course where I was like, hey, everybody, like, I like my religion. Like, I'm not trying, and I know, there's this big debate, is yoga religion, not religion? I would like to think of it as not religion because I'd like it to be allowed in the public schools. But, there are things in common with religion. But like, we are allowed, like, it's my decision what I do. I mean, like it's everyone's decision what they believe. And that is, Wendy, that third category is every bit as much what religious freedom means under our First Amendment as the first two categories.
All right, Rachel, I also did 500 hours of teacher
Oh my gosh,
training.
So
we're gonna have to take this conversation elsewhere.
Yes, oh my gosh, cool.
So my husband and I are, as I said, in Ann Arbor, and I just have to show you out that he just sent me a screenshot of the address of the Airbnb that we are staying, which of course happens to be at the intersection of church and state. Those are the names of the
street. Oh my gosh, this was meant to be.
So it's just right in the circle.
Everybody,
I might be overreaching
$200 right now, an extra $200.
A teeny little bit, but
oh my God,
I might be exaggerating, but it's right there.
That's really hilarious. Like you need to send that. So text me that later. That's too good.
Yeah. It's just we're right in the center of where they would intersect, but they do not exactly intersect.
Can
but
I think tweet that?
Awesome.
Okay,
yeah, I'll send you the screenshot. Okay. Anyway, so the idea, the other ideas, I was just so flustered by that. I think it's just one of those Bashert moments for those of you who don't have the Yiddish terminology. It's like meant to be. So the other question that I grapple with in our work, particularly in the workplace, is that this feeling that if we are going to have conversations about religion in the workplace, that we are endorsing religion in some way. And what experiences are you having about people who want to bring their whole self to work, who want religion to be a factor in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but not in this tension of privileging one over the other?
I think a lot of the problem right now is religion is this like can't touch that issue, right? People are so afraid that it's somehow disrespectful or maybe too respectful, as you're saying, Wendy, like either disrespectful or endorsing to even talk about it. It's like this third rail. It's and I think like we have to be able, it's sort of like sex and money or something, right? Like we have to be able to talk about it. Like we can't push it down. It's there. And frankly, our religious diversity and pluralism is one of the most beautiful parts of the mosaic that we call America. It's quite intentional and it makes us stronger, I would argue. And therefore, like, no, we can't push it down. Yes, there's a very comfortable way to talk about it. I would argue that one of the most comfortable ways to talk about it is to talk about it in the framework of religious freedom and what that means, and what that means is no, the government can't endorse one religion over another or religion over non-religion. What it means is I get to have my own religious practices so long as it doesn't cause harm to others. I think those are two really good like guidelines for talking about it. And there's a lot of Title VII, which is part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. There's a lot of very clear law on religious accommodation in the workplace. I mean, that's a nuanced, complex area, but I mean, you can't cause, like, an employer needs to respect to the extent possible the religion of their employees, but you also can't cause harm to all the rest of the employees in doing that, or to the business, like a certain amount of harm, right? Like you can cause a little bit of harm, de minimis harm, but not a lot of harm. But all these things are like very complex areas of the law. But I think like we can't just kind of like, it's like talking about race, right? It's like that's been so taboo. But I believe, as someone who's done a lot of work on race and education and thinking about my own race and what it means and everything, that the more we're able to talk about it openly, the better it goes, both for the cause of racial justice and for not being divided, right? Because it's so explosive. So I would say, like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to talk about religion in the workforce, but like, we all have to maybe start by laying ground rules and maybe try to see if we agree on what I would call a background of obviousness that's not always so obvious, which is religious freedom is what this country's about. What that means is there's a deep respect for religion, and also that there can't be preference by the government of one over another, and that we can't cause others harm with our religion.
So, Rachel, we have a question here from Abdul Maki, who is a member and leader within the American Muslim Institute, one of our partners, and he is asking, you refer to causing harm. What does harm mean in this context?
Yeah, I think that's a really important and hard question to answer. I mean, I think often that's where where things fall apart in response to this smart question, because Abdul, like, I think that's why I think that our judges and justices need to come from a variety of different backgrounds, and to be able to have like compassion and empathy and the ability to see from a variety of different perspectives. Because like in a birth control decision that came out of the Supreme Court in recent years, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was pointing out the problem of like, you may think that in allowing these opt-outs for birth control coverage, which is required by the Affordable Care Act, that no one's suffering. And like, certainly like, the attorneys arguing on the other side, like women weren't even mentioned. It was just like the religious freedom of the, not of the nonprofit that didn't even want to sign a 2-page waiver, that says like, I won't deal with it. Someone else is going to deal with the birth control part of your healthcare coverage as guaranteed by the Affordable Care Act. But what was missing was like, it actually does make it harder for women to have access to birth control. And I think, that's often the problem, that we're not able to see harm. Like even in this Dobbs decision that overruled Roe v. Wade, like it was a thick decision. I actually have the decision sitting here, all my notes all over it, but it's big, and women almost aren't mentioned in it. Like truly, almost don't appear in the decision. So I think it's a fair question, like what is harm? But like, for example, let's think about Charlie Craig and David Mullins in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, right? There was the baker who everyone heard about, and they did such a good job, and Jack Phillips and his Christianity, and he belongs to, and they're co-opting our messaging. And what about my diversity and my inclusion? Okay, but the state of Colorado had passed protections for LGBTQ people. That is the secular law of the land. And by saying I should have an exemption from that, you're asking the state to give special privilege when you're in a public accommodation. This isn't in the contours of your church. This is using the fire department and the streets and the everything else, right? You're part of, you are considered a public accommodation. And you are actually, if I said, can you see the harm if Charlie Craig and David Mullins had been a Black couple, like a Black female male couple? I believe that everybody would have said, yes, we can see the harm. So why can't we see the harm with an LGBTQ couple where the law of the state has been passed to protect this marginalized community? I would argue that is clear harm. So that's a very long answer to a very good question that, you know, is really complicated, but that would be my first go at a response. Abdul, I hope it's satisfying.
Thank you. Noreen, would you like to unmute yourself and share your?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I wouldn't answer it from a legal perspective. My response was based on my experiences of participating in interfaith dialogue. And I have felt that there are many instances where people have shared views which I was confronted by, but because the interfaith space enables those dialogues, there is a respect or a mutual sort of respect and understanding for other points of view. And that's where we can recreate the boundaries based on that understanding of other point of view. So I feel like what presents as harm becomes less harmful in an interfaith dialogue space. 100%. I don't know if I've said it right, but that's my own experience. That, I mean, take the example of the hijab. Yep. I wear hijab because it is my personal belief, but others have come up to me and said, look, this is actually you know, a women's rights issue. and you know, so exactly right. So I can say it is my right to choose to wear the hijab, and therefore that that understanding develops, and people walk away saying, yes, I can respect that point of view, and you know, I agree to disagree. Perhaps. Yeah,
I love that example. And I mean, I am a full believer in interfaith dialogue. I mean, I also worked at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism as the deputy director, and the interfaith work that I did was my absolute favorite part. And so I love it too. And I believe it's an elixir, like it's a healer and a uniter. And I am such a big fan. Like I did a project at a think tank bringing together white evangelical Christians and progressives on abortion and LGBTQ equality. Like, so I am like all in on that space. I would just say that, so we need to increase this, like what you all are doing. I heart what you are doing, actually. I heart what Wendy, what this Tri-Faith initiative is doing. Like I am a full believer in that. Like I am all in and I love it. And I think that as a start before everybody can dialogue, and we know there's so much that needs to happen that's not, and that's one of the problems. Like where our secular law has put into place protections for marginalized communities, that should be a baseline. Like that is clear harm. If there's a law protecting a community saying you can't do that and you do that, please don't tell me that that's not harm, because that as a baseline is what our society has defined as a harm, you know? And so that's just where I was coming from legally, but yours is, if we could do times a million what you're doing, our country would be in such a better place, you know, and everybody's rights would be so much better respected. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing. I love it.
Corey, did you get that written down as a testimonial quote for us? I thought that was a really good one. Thank you.
I can write one.
We would love that. Thank you. You know, this brings up such an interesting conversation, and the hijab piece as part of it is just so illuminating for me. We often struggle as leaders within the Tri-Faith Initiative that the first low-hanging fruit is our what we have in common. We're all more the same than we are different conversation, and we minimize difference. And we get stuck in that spot as the end goal. The end goal for me is not really that place where we kumbaya together, and rather where we can hold space for more than one truth to be held at the same time. And it feels to me in so many of the legal, the framers of our Constitution wanted that for us, right? They wanted us to coexist with love and compassion for each other's differences ahead of honoring only our similarities. And how we hold the conversations about these pieces, that I don't want more abortion. I just want free access to reproductive health. And I want to force no one to participate in that option, right? But I don't understand why my truth can't be held at the same time as others. And I'm curious, where are the legal standards around that ability?
I wish that were a simple question to answer.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we think that there's a simple answer, which is the do no harm line, and the court has endorsed that. But today, do I have confidence that this Supreme Court would, be a champion for the do no harm test? Or, as I was saying earlier, would have enough empathy and understanding to get where harm was actually being caused? Not really. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a great court for that. I mean, I will quote our first president, George Washington, who went on a tour selling our Bill of Rights and selling our country's Constitution in the late 1700s. And he visited on that tour the Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. And it was actually like a rally, and he spoke there. And then later he wrote them a letter. He condemned that the Constitution would give any license for harm in the name of religion. And what he said, and I'll quote, is, "Happily, the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance." So again, like that do no harm line, I think is so clear and so part of our history and tradition, which, by the way, this Supreme Court is trying to create this non-test of history and tradition, which sometimes works in our favor and other times, I mean, as a Jew and a woman, and I'm not Black or brown even, so we can, if I were, I would have even more reason to say so. We don't like as a test, and it shouldn't be a test. And it's a very manipulatable and manipulated test, and now we have to argue from. But in any case, this is what was at the core, Wendy, of our founding. And I think, do no harm. I mean, so long as, look, I mean, that's hard. Let me just also say, this is hard. Like, I am the leader of Americans United. I'm a lawyer, and these things sometimes make my own head hurt. They're not clean and simple, and like, what do we do with a nonprofit? I mean, Little Sisters of the Poor, that was trying to get around this compromise of, well, all you have to do is sign a 2-page thing. That was the compromise on birth control, worked out in our government. And the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism actually helped work that compromise out, just so you all know. But, Little Sisters of the Poor says, well, for us, it even violates our religious beliefs to sign that waiver. So what do we do? Like, in that instance, what do we do? And like, where are we going to draw the line? Well, I mean, I think the compromise of the waiver and that was a pretty creative thing, right, Wendy? Kind of doing what you're like, really taking seriously and really looking for what's the best solution, right? It's like in a yoga pose, right? When you're in Warrior 2, right? It's like all the tension is coming vertically and horizontally all at the same time. I think it struck an amazing warrior too for the yogis among us, that compromise. And still, like, Little Sisters of the Poor wasn't happy. Now, Little Sisters of the Poor employs people of every religion. It's not like, don't think it's just like a bunch of nuns that work for, primarily it's not, at their facilities around the country, right? So it's for us, what we would say is that is a reasonable compromise, because in the end, you are harming these women who won't have seamless and ready access to birth control, for whom it's not affordable. The hundreds of thousands of women that Ruth Bader Ginsburg referred to when she was sick in the hospital at Johns Hopkins and came in for the oral argument. It was amazing, to point that out. And her voice was so needed, because as a woman, she was able to see that, but it wasn't being brought out in the case. So, complicated questions, Wendy, but, at the point of actual harm, bottom line, and where our government has made laws to stop harm, going back to the other conversation we had, like, there's a clean line.
Thank you. All right, so final question. And it is the most difficult of all of them, I believe, from Deb.
Oh, 2 minutes. Yes.
How do we talk about Christian nationalism?
Okay. So this is what I actually wanted to say. That's actually not too hard to answer. Something that folks should be aware of from our poll testing is what works really well in describing the movement that we're fighting is pointing to it as religious extremism and religious extremists. Now, let me make one really important point. We always need to check our language as we're using it to make certain that nobody thinks that who we're talking about are Muslims when we say that. Because I will tell you from our poll testing, given how many conservatives and self-identified conservatives also define their opposition as religious extremists, that's who a lot of them are going to try to define as religious extremists. But I will tell you, as I think about when I use language, 99 times of 100 times, there is no confusion. There is no risk of confusion that that's who I'm talking about. So I think at the same time, it is our job to educate about Christian nationalism. 40% of people a couple of years ago in our poll had no idea what Christian nationalism even was. So there's a lot of so you can't just, another point that I'll make is, you can't just use the term Christian nationalism without explaining it, right? That we are talking about those who believe that America was created by and for white Christians and who want to codify that privilege into our law, right? And I would also say a critical part of that is to say, and by the way, this isn't the Christianity that most Christians who I know identify with or would ever say even qualifies as Christianity. It's a very narrow, frankly, political movement that is using and co-opting Christianity towards the ends of power. So those are some pointers that I guess I would offer. And I see people are leaving, and I don't want to overstay my welcome, Wendy, but I just hope everybody goes to au.org, signs up, becomes a supporter, because we need you. And we also have a Faith Leaders United list. If you go to About Us and how to get involved, there's some really clear tabs. We just redid them. Sign up for our lists, and become part of our movement, because we're fighting for the freedom of all of us, for equality, and really for the American ideal.
Thank you. Thank you. As the end of the year comes, there are many important causes to give. I hope that you'll spread yourself Rachel's direction some way with some of your dollars. It is also part of our year-end annual campaign. And if you liked this program and other programs like it, we would appreciate your support as well. Rachel, thank you so much for your time today. It is so important that we continue this conversation, and please, a reminder to vote.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Enjoy the day.
See you all. Bye.